Well, hey, good to see you. Welcome to Resonate Church. So glad that we're together today. My name is Chris. I have the joy, honor being one of our pastors here, and we are walking through a sermon series specifically helping you to identify how does God interact and how do you interact with the Lord when it comes to your work. We're calling this 9 to 5, although we all know nobody really works 9 to 5. It's 8 to 5 or 7 to 3 or something like that. Maybe on the East Coast they have different working hours than we do on the West Coast. But I want to throw a number up for you to just kind of first glance, put your eyes on. We'll talk about this number for a while. Here's a number. 90,000. 90,000. The number 90,000 is the number of hours that the average American will spend at their workplace in their life. 90,000 hours. That is a long time. It is safe to say that this is, well over a third of your of waking hours from the ages of 22 to age 70. It's very safe to say that like the people that you work around, your customers and your coworkers become some of the most significant and formative voices. Your career and your place of work, your work experience shapes so significantly the experience of people in their life. This number 90,000 is kind of a little scary when you see it, and it causes many people to feel frantic about decisions when it comes to work. Am I in the right job? Is this the right place for me or the right thing for me to do? Is this the right amount of time? That sounds like a ton of hours. Is this the right environment for me? And the topic of jobs can actually be so sensitive. What we do in our occupation and what we do for work can be so sensitive because it is close to the heart oftentimes. We can oftentimes self-define or allow society to define worth or define success or define failure of an individual based on their work. So selecting a job can be really daunting. It can freeze people. We see this very often when people graduate from college and have to make life decisions of like, what am I gonna do with my life? Because listen, if you pick it right, some people would say you're successful if you pick it right and if you do the right thing. And other people would say, if you pick it wrong, you are unsuccessful. Like, think about this. If you work at Google, you might say, I'm pretty successful. And then if you say another person works at McDonald's, maybe I work at McDonald's, okay, maybe I'm not so successful. Unless you're the janitor at Google, then maybe you're not successful. And unless you're like the CEO or the owner of McDonald's, then you might be successful. It's kind of confusing, right? Like if you deliver newspapers for your job, like maybe you wouldn't see yourself as successful, but if you deliver like medical transplants, you would see yourself as successful. Maybe like if you drive a company car, you would see yourself as successful, but if the company car is a garbage truck, then you would go, I don't know if I'm actually as successful. I might feel like a failure if I do that. Recently, I learned that garbage men who spend their entire career doing that job and in that industry and in that career can make well over 6 figures by the end of their life. And I remember thinking, wow, maybe that's changing the way that I think about that job. The whole thing, I think, is just incredibly confusing. And all of the confusion is leading to some cynicism and some jadedness that we experience today in our culture. One thing that is just so very clear, almost everybody in America unanimously agrees that work sucks, that it sucks. Almost everybody unanimously agrees that work sucks. The most hated day of the week is Monday. Monday's the most hated day of the week. It signals the start of another work week for many individuals. And if you even listen to our language, you'll hear the way that it's normal for us to talk kind of gives evidence to the fact that like we just kind of hate work. We don't really like that we have to do that. Phrases like the daily grind. the daily grind. Kind of paints the picture that like your work will wear you away and sand you down over the course of your life. Phrases like grunt work or busy work kind of give evidence to this idea that like your stuff doesn't have to be purposeful. You can kind of do mindless, like tedious stuff that really has no purpose if it occupies your time. And even the term like work-life balance can subtly communicate that work is not a part of your life, that it actually competes with your life and it will steal away your life if you're not careful. That work-life balance actually maybe describes something that says we don't think that work should be a part of our life. It's kind of intrusive, or from the outside, it's fairly weird to think about. But if you look at the breakdown of hours in a week, you'll see that this is, that's kind of untrue. Like 168 hours in a work week, in a normal week, in any week, not a work week, 168 hours. That's how many hours God has given us in a week. And a healthy person who is resting, kind of well, I guess, would be asleep for 56 of those hours. So immediately a huge chunk of that 168 gets taken away. And you see that the next most significant allotment of a person's time is towards their work, 40 hours a week. Even like normal functions of the human body, like eating, don't take as much time as we spend in the week working. So if you study our language, you'll see that maybe there's some evidence to the fact that we just don't really like work. But I think if you look at our actions, it's even clearer. Right now, 51% of all Americans who are over the age of 55 are retired from work. 51% of people said, I am done working if they're over the age of 55. That's according to Pew Research. And even some of the like heroes of our modern day, some of the hero stories are like the people who were able to retire in their 30s or able to retire from work, to literally step away and not have to work anymore in their 30s or in their 40s. Like those stories become almost heroic. If you look like kind of zoom in a little bit farther, you'll see that the average time that an individual spends at any one workplace or any one company or occupation is about 4.1 years, which means that an individual will transition what they do for work somewhere between 12 and 15 times over the course of their life. And you might chalk that up to like youthfulness, or like, okay, when you're early on in your career, you're trying to figure out what do you enjoy, what environment is best for you, or what do you like to do. But a recent survey by the Career Change Challenge was able to survey workers in the US, and they found that 80% of people over the age of 45 are considering changing their careers. So it's not just in your youth. There is an issue with the way that we as Americans see the necessity or the desire to work. Clearly something is very confusing here, right? The effort to figure out how we work and how this causes people to interact personally and mentally and emotionally, it can really cause people to go into a frenzy, get frantic, and other people freeze altogether and go, you know what, I don't even care about this anymore. I'm down to just lock myself in for a long period of time. I remember a quote from Mark Twain that said, most men die at age 27. We just don't bury them until they're 72. I remember thinking about that and thinking, man, most people spend the majority of their life not understanding what the purpose is for how God has created them to work. This relationship between our lives and our work. So here's a pressing question that I think that it's important for us to ask ourselves today. Why would God design something that everybody has to do and almost everybody hates to do? Why would God do that? Doesn't that seem almost like kind of a fail on his part? Like as he's creating the earth and he's creating how humans will interact with each other and he gives instructions to his people, doesn't it seem like a little bit of a fail on his part that he would create something that so many people have to do and so many people hate to do over and over again? I think it's pretty wild. Most people express this as a natural part of the human experience, but never bother to ask why. Why would God allow this to be something that we engage in over and over? And I think it might be because the American dream itself says that if you apply yourself, if you work hard, then anything is available to you under the sun. I mean, that is the American dream. You can be as successful as you want to be as long as you work hard. And therefore, to ask a question about why we should work or why we should work hard almost seems un-American. It almost seems unpatriotic. It almost seems like questioning the American ideals itself. By the way, while we're on the subject of the American dream, I think the American dream is one of the most sneakily destructive things to a genuine gospel Christianity because it breeds work-based everything. Works-based everything. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but the American dream elevates worldly success. And it defines worldly success by how much money you make and how many assets you have. It mixes both nationalism and a prosperity gospel, and it promotes self-seeking as the primary purpose for why you are an American citizen. I think it's totally destructive. And one of the things that we have to undo as the church is the understanding that the American dream is the dream that we should all live to, strive to live under and strive to succeed under. But here's what we see in Scripture when God gives us some evidence on work. We see it in the very beginning in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. You can go with me there right now. We'll be in Genesis 2, Genesis 3, and then we'll be in Colossians chapter 3 if you kind of want to put your fingers in those pages. Genesis 2:15, we see this in the creation account. This is pretty interesting, pretty crazy. The Lord God took the man and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. Genesis 2, God puts man in the garden to work it and to take care of the garden. This is very, very interesting because something huge in human history happens in Genesis chapter 3. It's the fall. It's when sin enters. All of the bad stuff of the world starts to tangle itself in. Sin starts to get its fingers and its claws into every aspect of creation in Genesis chapter 3. But in Genesis chapter 2, we see God introduce the responsibility of work to mankind before the fall. Before sin enters the world, before all of the things start to go haywire, God designed mankind to have a responsibility to work. Some other things that he gave us before the fall. The presence of God with us, walking with us. Check, that's a good thing. Intimacy, marital intimacy. Check, that's a good thing. He gives us pets. I'm not a dog person, but for many of you, this is good news that before the sin entered the world, that God cared about how we interacted with creation and with animals. Okay, check. And then the strange thing, work. God gives work before the fall. The Bible teaches that God implemented the responsibility for work before sin entered the world. My friend Joshua would always joke about this, and he would say, did you know that we never see snow in Genesis chapter 1 and 2? Did you know that? The only times that we see snow are post Genesis chapter 3. We don't see it until after sin comes into the world, and that's why I'm allowed to hate snow so much. That was funny as he describes that. But it seems like work is a good thing if God introduces it before things start to go haywire. And here's why it's a good thing. Because God is a creator. God is an author. God works. God has efforts to organize and to create, to be the author of things, the author of life, the author over all of creation. And when he makes us in his image, we take on his likeness. We take on his characteristics. It is an honor to have attributes and purpose that mirrors the attributes of God. And so we start to see this huge tension, which is like, if this is good for us and God designed it this way, why is it so hard for us? Maybe it is good news for you to hear that God designed work to be a good thing, because you're going to spend 90,000 hours of your life doing it, most likely, if you're like the average American. Take spirituality out of this for a second. Just like in terms of psychology studies, what we recently have begun to recognize is that when people don't work and don't feel a sense of responsibility, that the likelihood of high anxiety and high depression increases. I did read a study that somewhere between 4 and 6 times more likely is an individual to have depression if they're unemployed. If you're unemployed, it takes something away from you that seemingly God has designed to be a good thing. We also know what happens to the attitude of individuals and the emotional state of individuals who never have to feel the responsibility to provide. We know what spoiled people feel like and what it seems like to interact around them. And so we recognize, okay, that can't be the way that God has designed us. Our lives are actually better because of God's designed purpose to give us work and responsibility to do. It's His kindness that allows for us to have a mirrored image of Himself, to take on characteristics like Himself, to take on responsibility like Himself, even after the fall, even after humanity rebelled against God. His kindness to us to allow for us to have purpose in work. It is a great responsibility. It's a great honor for God to allow for us to tend His creation, to take the raw materials of the earth and give us responsibility to grow and to flourish and to work. I'm not sure if you knew this, but you can actually right now, today, apply to work for the royal family in England. If you go to royal.uk/join us, you can actually go and apply to work for the royal family. And you know, so as we just announced, like we're gonna praying to send a team to London in the next few years. Like, hey, maybe this is something that some of those people get a job doing, like actually working for the royal family. Right now, there are 7 roles available in the royal family, one of which is fixing the plumbing at Buckingham Palace. So if you have any like plumbing experience and you want to go like start a church somewhere internationally, man, this is perfect for you. But on the website where you apply to get one of these roles, in big writing says, with the royal household, everyday jobs become exceptional. With the royal household, everyday jobs become exceptional. I think this is a beautiful picture of what it feels like when God gives us responsibility over His creation. Man, what an honor. What an honor. What an honor to be put in charge of the royal estate of the king over all. What an honor. So why do we hate it so much? Why do so many people have issue with work? Well, because work is cursed. Work is cursed. And I don't mean like 4-letter words, like you curse at work. Some of you guys do. You might need to repent of that. Work is cursed. It's one of the punishments that came as a result of Genesis chapter 3, as a result of the fall, as a result of sin. It says this in Genesis 3:17. To Adam, God said, because you listened to your wife and ate the fruit of the tree about which I commanded you, you should not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat from it. All the days of your life, it will produce thorns and thistles for you. You will eat the plants of the field by the sweat of your brow. You will eat your food until you return to the ground. Very simply, sin corrupted the holiness and worshipful act of the honor of serving in the royal family of God. The worship that it was intended to be, of taking the raw materials from the earth and doing something meaningful and purposeful and tending to those things. Sin has corrupted that. It becomes difficult. It becomes hard. And this is not just like, hey, if you're a farmer, you recognize that like tilling the ground is hard and you're going to sweat. No, this is like applying to all of work, all of the ways that we see and we find our purpose when it comes to vocation and what we do for work. It is hard. It is hard to cultivate, to subdue, to tend, to grow, to farm. All of this, even though it's extremely purposeful, will be difficult for you. In his book, Raising Sons, the book is called The Intentional Father, but it's a book about raising sons. The author, John Tyson, tells us what he teaches his sons about manhood. His 13-year-old son, he introduces the rules of manhood, he says, and this is the very first rule of manhood. Life is hard. Life is hard. Life is hard. Work is hard. It's a rule of life. When I read this, I felt so cared for. I felt so seen. I was like, oh, the couple on Instagram that retired when they were 25 and send emails now and they live off a beach somewhere, that's not real life. That can't be the expectation. That can't be the rule of life is like, this is what it looks like to succeed. This can't be it. Life is hard. Man, many times since I read that, I thought, oh, if life is hard for me, man, I must be normal. I must be super normal. This must be not an abnormal thing that I'm experiencing. This must be incredibly normal. Life is hard. I felt cared for when I read that. Work will crush you. Work will crush you. It's good, but it will crush you. Parenting, which is another part of the curse that was difficult. Pain in childbearing. Parenting is beautiful. It will crush you. It will absolutely demolish your ego. Your hair will turn gray. You will be fatigued and exhausted and tired. And the same for work. Work has been cursed. It's toil. It's hard. It's difficult. It's painful. It is extremely fatiguing. And we tend to want to minimize the effects of the curse by taking matters into our own hands. Here's a couple ways that we do that. We try to escape the curse through these ways. The first way is that we try and master it. We try and get ahead of it. And the way that we do that is by hopping from one thing to another, to another, to another. We stay on our toes. And then at the first sign of weakness, the first signs of difficulty, the first times where we come into a life that is hard when it comes to what we do for work, we go, this must be the wrong thing for me, so I'm gonna bounce and go do something else. Because it's hard, because it's not all that I imagined, all that I dreamed of, this must be the wrong thing for me. I'm gonna go bounce and do something else. I was thinking about what it would be like if a unmarried single person came to you and said, hey, you know what? There is the perfect spouse out there for me. And I'm going to continue to date and date and date until I find the perfect person. And you know what? I believe that God has the perfect kids for me lined up. And so we're going to keep having kids until I have the perfect kid. And then I also think that God has the perfect church for me out there. And so I'm going to keep trying and trying and trying and shopping until I find the perfect church for me. What would you say to that person? What would you say to that person? Now you might tell them, no, you don't get it. You don't understand how this whole thing kind of goes down. Those things don't exist out there. We commit to those things despite their imperfection. But I think so many of us, when it comes to career and job and work, we go, there's a perfect something out there for me. Tons of vacation time, great pay, love the coworkers, extremely purposeful, great benefits in a very nice location that's low stress for me. And I'm going to keep hopping and hopping and hopping and shopping and shopping and shopping until I find that thing. But there's a rule. Life is hard as a rule. Work is cursed. The second way that we try to get out of this is that we let it master us. We don't try and master it. We let it master us. It becomes a ruler to us. It becomes a slave owner to us. What we do for work, we fully immerse ourselves in it and make it our one-track mind. This is the thing for which I exist on the planet. This is the thing that I'll sacrifice all else in order to get. It used to be that so closely was work tied with identity that people would take on a last name based on what they did for their job, what they did for their work. So if you met somebody whose last name was Ward, then they were a guard or a watchman. If you met somebody whose last name was Smith, well, they worked with metal. If you met somebody whose last name was Fletcher, well, they made arrows. That was their occupation. And if you met somebody whose last name was Bogart, they were a pig farmer by the woods. That's what Bogart means. That's my wife's maiden name. My father-in-law told me that one of the first times that we hung out. Some people still identify themselves by what they do. But it used to be that once upon a time, you would ask somebody, hey, what's your calling? What are you supposed to do with your life? And they might go, what are you talking about? My last name's Bogart. We're pig farmers by the woods. Don't you know that? That's what I do with my life. That's my identity. That's what we do. It's not quite that easy nowadays because we find alternative ways to figure out a pathway for vocation that's not our last name. But what's true is this: work is not a result of the fall. It did make it extremely hard, but it didn't make it bad. Our lives are actually better because God has put work in front of us to do. But there has to be a redemption that comes to where we no longer work for an identity, for a name, for a success metric, but we work out of an identity, out of a name, out of a success metric. And that's where the work of Jesus enters into the picture. And his work is redemption. The redemption of all of creation, the redemption of all that was broken, the redemption of all people who have the opportunity to ascribe to him glory and worth. And truthfully, the redemption of the curse that was placed on all of creation. That wasn't just about work and it wasn't just about childbearing, but there was a promise given in Genesis chapter 3, that one day somebody would come and crush the head of Satan. One day somebody would come as a hero to redeem all that is broken, all that is hard, all that is busted in the world. One of my favorite stories in the Jesus Storybook Bible is in the chapter of Isaiah. Callie and I read it together and we love the chapter heading. The chapter heading is Operation No More Tears. Operation No More Tears. That's the promise of God in Christ through the work, because of the work of redemption that he brings through the gospel. Remember, the promise of God was to crush Satan's head and reverse the curse. Remember that in exiling from the garden, he didn't abandon his people to live a hard and tedious and sweat-filled life towards work by themselves. He promised accompanying them. Remember that he became their God. He became a present hope in hardship. Jesus engaged in a work himself, and that was the work of redemption. His perfect life, amassing this model of what it means to be holy, true holiness, and all of his life leading to a sacrifice on the cross where he exchanges his perfection for our imperfection, his good for our bad, his holiness for our sin, and paying for those things, dying and resurrecting. What happens is the redemption of creation that we await for longingly at the end of time. But we also experience personally and we experience presently right now in a certain type of way. Jesus, through his life and his death and his resurrection, has redeemed the curse. He has redeemed the hard issue of why work is cursed. The old things get traded in for new things. The old life gets traded in for new life and swapped for new purposes. Jesus reverses the curse of works, so that in this act of redemption, there is a breaking of a bondage of worth and of value that gets ascribed to his people through their occupation, through their work. One of his ways, one of the outputs of his redemptive work is the breaking of the mastery of us in slavery to what we do. Very plainly put, this is talked about in Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as you are working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ that you are serving. In the curse, we don't serve Christ. We don't have the capacity to. We are owned. We are mastered by this thing that will demand 90,000 hours of our life. But because of the redemption of Jesus and the undoing of all wrong, we have the ability to work as unto Christ. The master over our life shifts. The one who names us shifts. The one who gives us purpose and calls us successful shifts. And the way by which it happens shifts as well. Because of the cross, we get to see work through a totally different lens, a brand new lens. Not that Jesus helps work become easier for you, but that work now helps Jesus become glorified through you. I'll say that again. Not that Jesus helps work become easier for you. That's not what he does. But in the redemption of what Christ has done on the cross and the gospel, work helps Jesus become glorified through your life. He becomes glorified through your work. So work becomes hard still. It's still fatiguing, but the purpose becomes grander and greater once again. We are free from work having to define us. We are free from work having to define us. And although it is long and it is difficult, we can be free to work well because of who has saved us. So now what? What do we do with all of that? How do we take that as Christians and live differently this Monday? How do we take that as Christians and live differently at 5 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, heading into the evening? In 50 years from now, if you're still working and you're still somewhere in that 90,000 hours, how do you take that and live differently because of that? Well, I point you to a resource in her masterful essay called Why Work? Dorothy Sayers wrote about how we measure the importance and the value of work and how it can glorify God. This is what she says. Work is not measured by the money that it brings to the producer, but work is measured by the worth of the product. The worth of the product. Now, what's interesting is that the worth of the product is not always monetary. She gives an example of paper. Paper is extremely valuable. Why? Because you can capture timeless ideas on paper. They have immense worth with paper. You can capture things that communicate love. You can log beauty through song and poetry on paper. Maybe not something that we see as extremely valuable. She also goes on to say this: we should ask of an enterprise, not will this pay well, but is it good? We should ask of a man, not what does he make, but what is his work worth? We should ask of goods, not can we induce people to buying them, but we should ask, are they useful things that are made well? The redemption of the curse is this, that Christ has stamped all things as an opportunity for glorifying him. All work endeavors, every good thing that we can lay our hand to has been stamped, pre-stamped for Christ, with the opportunity to glorify him when his people engage in that work. So for the Christian, everywhere is an opportunity to do good work that is glorifying to God. It's not the job that you do, it's the way that you engage the job that you do that matters. And it's not easy, it's difficult, it's extremely difficult, but the work will no longer be an eternal curse. Now it becomes leverage for you to glorify Christ with your life. So in his sovereignty, he brought you somewhere to your workplace. He brought you there in his sovereignty. For some reason, I don't know why he did. You probably don't know why he did. But for some reason, he brought you there in his sovereignty. He's placed you there. It doesn't have to be your dream job. It does not. It doesn't even need to pay what you think it should pay or have the vacation time that you desire for it to have. There's one thing that it needs to meet in terms of holiness criteria, and this is the criteria. Can you use it to glorify the goodness of Jesus? Can you use it to glorify the goodness of Jesus? Where at one point you would ask a person, what do you do? What's your calling? What are you supposed to do with your life? And they would point to their last name. Now, as you've been adopted into Christ's family, because of his redemptive work, your name changes. He calls you beloved. He calls you saint. He adopts you. So when the Christian gets asked, what's your calling? We should all point to the same thing. We should all point to our last name in Christ. We should all point to the new identity that he has given us. Like, don't you know my name? Don't you know already? My vocation is to glorify Christ, the goodness of Christ. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, it is your unique responsibility to find an opportunity and figure out how your work magnifies the beauty of Jesus. Maybe it's customer interactions. Maybe it's coworker interactions. Maybe it's products that bless people. Maybe it's leveraging your finances that you get from that job that you do, or creating jobs that benefit the city. Whether it's 40 hours or 45 hours or 20 hours or 55 hours, it can be a blessing into the kingdom of God. 40 hours a week of blessing, 40 hours a week of worshiping Jesus through your vocation and the way by which you apply your life and your efforts to work. 40 hours every single week until you retire of holy sacramental engagement. That's 90,000 hours of purposeful, worshipful task, building something that Christ can use to extend his kingdom and glorify himself. Another Monday to let the model of your life cause Jesus to be seen as great. And this is foundational when we think critically about why God has allowed us to have our 9 to 5. May this ring true in your hearts this week and next week, and for the rest of your life as you continue to operate in God-glorifying work. May it be true for us, Resonate.